Africa's police disciplinary system is perceived to be failing to hold officers accountable for misconduct, particularly in cases of brutality and corruption. And despite thousands of complaints, only a fraction lead to hearings and even fewer result in serious consequences like dismissal. This perceived culture of impunity has eroded public trust in SAPS. Now, the acquittal of VIP unit officers who assaulted victims on camera is seen to highlight the police's failure to define and enforce standards of conduct. Independent crime and policing researcher David Bruce is going to be joining us now for more, perhaps to unpack further. David, a very good evening and thank you for your time on the SABC at this hour.
Good evening and good evening to your listeners.
I mean, let's just get your reaction. Firstly, following the acquittal of the VIP unit officers who assaulted victims on camera, I mean, despite strong evidences, they've been acquitted. And so if we're looking at defining and enforcing the standards of conduct of police internally, that's not being questioned, its efficacy as well. Tell us a little bit more as well in relation to the report unearthed.
Well, this is just a case where it should have been a relatively straightforward matter for the police officers to be convicted. So we're talking, of course, about an incident that happened in July 2023. And finally, in April of this year, the police officers were acquitted in a SAPS internal disciplinary process for these assaults, which were captured on video. And so this is a case where we've got a video which shows members of the VIP protection units unlawfully assaulting members of the public. There doesn't seem to be any question that this incident took place and that members of the unit were involved in this unlawful assault. But nevertheless, the disciplinary system concludes by acquitting the members of any kind of unlawful conduct.
And so, David, on the back of that, I mean, if we are assessing the issue of transparency with regards to this process and the weakness that have come through to the fore, sanctioning police brutality, talk to us about the report, some of the contributing factors as well that the SAPS, that SAPS undergoes. I'm asking this because we're looking at resources, we're looking at the culture of impunity that perhaps exists, political will, even fear. What's coming through on that front? In the same breath, what are the reforms that then are needed?
Well, possibly the biggest problem is that in many cases the disciplinary officials, including the presiding officers and the police officers who are presenting what could be seen as the prosecution case, are quite inexperienced. So the one argument that has been made is that what the SAPS needs to establish is dedicated disciplinary units. But the basic question that this kind of case seems to point to is a question about whether there is any commitment on the part of the SAPS to controlling this kind of behavior. Because, this is a kind of brazen case of police violence where it's one case where it would have seemed that it should have been a straightforward matter for a conviction to be secured.
And so if we look at the functioning of the criminal justice system at large, people questioning whether there's ill discipline amongst SAPS, corruption issues, police brutality. What is the role of oversight bodies in this regard? If we look at IPID, the recommendations that also follow, SAPS leadership at large, even just political will. Anything coming through on that front based on the report?
Well, you see, the one mistake that many people seem to make is to tend to rely on IPID to resolve these problems. At best, IPID can serve as a type of complementary mechanism, which can support the SAPS in trying to resolve these problems. But unless there's a commitment from the police and particularly from police leadership to resolving these issues, it's really not something that IPID can have much impact on.
And because there are obviously consequences to all of this, how does this entrench or reinforce the issue of, or the lack of accountability, but even just the trust from the public in the system, respect for the rule of law at large, consequence management. What does this communicate to the broader society then?
Well, you see, one of the issues that is at stake here is a question about essentially what kind of police service the SAPS is. Is the SAPS going to increasingly be recognized as a kind of professional police service, or is it going to increasingly be seen as almost on a comparable level to thugs and criminals in terms of the conduct of its members? So, what we're pushing for is an approach which in terms of which, through improvements in the quality of policing, there are improvements in, levels of public trust and cooperation with the police. But part of, what it would be necessary for that to be achieved would be for there to be the questions of the control of police conduct and effective discipline to be addressed effectively.
Well, David, there are still obviously more questions than answers at this point. I'm going to thank you for your time and for weighing in at this hour on this pertinent issue. Independent crime and policing researcher David Bruce weighing in on internal policing accountability mechanisms in South Africa, of course, based on that ISS report, which exposes its efficacy or lack thereof, and really what are the reforms that are needed headed forward. Again, thank you to him for joining us at this hour.